COVID-19 pandemic, and the statements are related to the statutes of the state of Minnesota. Number one, it has been determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related peacetime emergency declaration made by Governor Wolf in accordance with Minnesota Statute Chapter 12. Second one, we have ensured that all members of the body participating in the meeting, wherever their physical location, can hear one another and can hear all discussion and testimony offered at today's meeting. Another statute reference. 3, we have also ensured that members of the public present at the regular meeting location of the body can hear all discussion and testimony and all votes of the members of the body. We have urged the public not to attend this meeting in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic and have ensured that members of the public can view and monitor the meeting remotely in real time by broadcasting the meeting on the Cook County website. Fourthly, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have determined that it may be unseasonable for County Auditor Brady Powers, County Attorney Molly Hicken, County Administrator Rita Rogers, and members of the Board of Commissioners to be physically present at the county boardroom at the Cook County Courthouse. Lastly, all votes will be conducted by roll call. Each member's vote on each issue will be identified and recorded. And I would remind you to please mute when you're not speaking and turn off any audio in the background. And would you please join me at this time by stating the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we'll take a look at the agenda, and I'm going to do a roll call. If you have any adjustments or comments, they must be related to COVID-19 pandemic, as mentioned. So I'll go through that. I'll start off with Commissioner Storley. Any adjustments?
I do not require any adjustments.
Thank you. Commissioner Mills?
None, thank you. Over.
Commissioner Duker?
None. Over.
Commissioner Deschamps?
None.
I have none. So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Say your name, please.
Commissioner Mills, I move to approve the agenda. Over.
Thank you.
Storley,
Do we have
second.
a second? Storley seconds, okay. Roll call vote. Commissioner Deschamps?
Aye.
Commissioner Duker?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills?
Commissioner Mills, aye. Over.
Aye, over, unanimous. Okay, so we'll go into the public comment period. Is there anyone in the boardroom that is there for public comment? Or do we have any that have been submitted?
No, Mr. Chair, no, there have been no public comments submitted, and there is no one present.
Okay, very good. Then we'll go into our Emergency Operations Command Incident Man Team updates from Grace Granager and Mike Keyport. Grace, are you with us?
I am. I gave my updates at the PHHS board meeting,
Sure.
so we should all have a copy of those,
Yep.
and hopefully we can put them in the packet as well if there is one.
Okay. Emergency Manager Keyport, do you have any other comments?
I'm sorry, can you repeat, Mr. Chair?
Oh, do you have any comments and updates for us in regards to the EOC?
Sure, just a few things.
you could see from Grace's report that the numbers spiked a little bit in Minnesota. I don't think it's a reason for people to get over anxious about it. We kind of expected that to happen. We still, as you know, have no positive cases in Cook County. And as you know, this pandemic is much different than a wildfire or a flood that we can see the end, and this one we really can't. And you know, we are in kind of a holding pattern right now, but that holding pattern certainly does give us more time for the EOC, Grace and I, community members to plan ahead and prepare, and that's good news. The governor, as you know, has quite a list of executive orders going on out there. Last Friday, he put out a directive for a cloth mask drive, and he relayed it through the state fires marshal's office down to local fire departments. And we currently have a very good donations management system in place within our EOC. I don't expect to see a big influx in the cloth masks. I think we're getting what we need, and we're asking for more. Of course, we received a package actually from Iowa yesterday with masks in it. Speaking of masks, if I could just clarify one thing: when we talk of masks, the CDC describes a cloth mask, as we call them, as a face covering, and a factory-made, FDA-approved would be considered a face mask, a surgical mask, or an N95 mask. So they just like that discrimination there. So. We're still working through MDH, FEMA, HSEM, all have many forms of funding and grants. Kelly Berg in the auditor's office has set up a grants portal account. The first week in May, we are hoping, or we are being told, that Kelly will get some training as to reporting and requesting reimbursement. At that time, as to how that portal is going to work, we will be, at this point, reporting and requesting direct through FEMA. So that's still coming. It's not as fast as I would like to see it come, but we'll work through it. I think the biggest expense that we're incurring right now would be overtime, and that is reimbursable. We will be incurring some costs in PPE orders and supplies, things that we just want to have on hand. As I say, we don't know how long this pandemic's going to go, so just to be ahead of the game. That's all I have for you today. Certainly appreciate the support that we're getting. So thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, any questions of either Grace or Mike? I'll just do a roll call on that. I'll start off with Commissioner Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Mike, for your work. I do have kind of a general question, and would like to hear your feedback as well as just thoughts from the board, considering kind of more recent guidelines. I was just wondering what kind of messaging or to what extent are we really trying to encourage everyone out in the public to wear masks, and how is that message getting out there? If we should be doing more, if we should be finding cool ways to wear a mask, or just kind of break through that norm. I know they're not necessarily comfortable, but it sounds like the one of the better things we can do at this point. So I just wanted to get your thoughts and feedback on that. Over.
Okay, who would like to first take that on? Grace, would you or Mike?
I can take that on. The mask question is complicated for messaging. This, as Mike said, the CDC changed the way that they refer to masks. They, up until a week ago, were referred to as alternative face masks, and now they're being called face coverings. And as Mike mentioned, there is this distinction between what is considered personal protective equipment and what is considered a face covering. So MDH is, the Minnesota Department of Health is following the CDC's guidelines that individuals wear cloth face coverings in public, not the personal protective equipment, which would be an N95 or a surgical mask, because those are in short supply and need to be reserved for our healthcare workers. It's not a requirement that I've been getting calls from people saying, hey, I was out in public and I saw someone in a business and they weren't wearing a face covering. There's no legal requirement for people to wear face coverings. But it is a recommendation to be wearing them in public spaces. So I think our strategy within the EOC to date has been to have this donations request out there to get the face coverings to our healthcare partners, followed by frontline workers and individuals in the community who are at the highest risk for complications of COVID. Another piece of important information about the face coverings is that they do not prevent you from getting COVID-19. They might provide some protection against spreading COVID-19, and that's really what the evidence shows. There might be some benefit to spreading COVID in public spaces, and so that's the rationale for using the alternative face coverings. To me, from an equity perspective, the most important thing is that the people who are in public the most often and most at risk are able to access these masks, which is why I'm really proud of our donations effort to date. I know getting a face covering, sorry, I'm still learning the language myself, can be hard for people who don't sew and don't have friends and family who sew. And so that, to me, is really the focus. As when people have, if we're asking people to do this, how are we helping people to get the materials they need to be able to do this, and how are we prioritizing that? So I guess as time goes on, I think it will be important to try to get more people to get a mask or a face covering and to wear it out in public. But for now, in the beginning, I'm really trying to focus on kind of taking an equity perspective and focusing our donations drive that way. Kind of a long answer to your question. Hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yes and no. I mean, that covered it the very best. The only thing I would add is that the other message we want to kind of send is that, the cloth face coverings certainly do help, but we don't want people to get self-confident that that's the real way to go, and it's not gonna allow you to get the virus. So just a word of caution, I guess that's all I would add.
Absolutely, Mike. That's something we've talked about at length in the EOC, is that there is some evidence that the face coverings can help, but the strongest evidence is for social distancing and hand washing and staying home when you're sick. So we really want to avoid a situation where someone feels like they have a mask and they can ignore the other important pieces of the equation.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Commissioner DeShawn, do you have any comments or questions?
I have
on this topic?
no questions.
Okay. Commissioner Duker?
Yeah, my concerns are messaging and the messaging we're getting out in the local paper. We extended our emergency proclamation in order to continue to get funding. and that created some confusion among the community members because of the way it was reported in the paper. And so over the last week or so, I've had a huge increase in people calling, asking how the county has authority to force them to shut their businesses, which is not at all what that order was about. And just wondering how, besides, yes, face masks are a big concern to have that messaging out, but just get the messaging out that the only order is from the governor, not the county specifically, and how do we message that so that we keep things calm? Over.
Okay. Commissioner Storley?
Just going back for a second, is that something you're wanting us to respond to, Commissioner Dukirk?
I thought it was a comment. I'm sorry. Commissioner Dukirk, did you want to comment on that, or was that just a statement? I missed that.
Well, it was a bit of both, because it's quite concerning, because people are very confused and they don't know what to do because they're reading information that is not at all what us as the county has put out. And so I don't know how we address it. Grace and Mike are amazing at getting information out, and how do we resolve it? But I mean, specifically in the paper, under the emergency management declaration, it says the extension of the COVID-19 resolution is followed by businesses that will be closed for 30 more days. So, the way it was reported, I can understand why businesses were confused, and I thought that what we did to extend our emergency resolution meant that we were saying that businesses need to be closed. So I think we do need to address it.
Okay. Okay, so Grace, go ahead. I guess how do you respond to that, or what could we do?
Yeah, I mean, I know Mike also has gotten questions about that, and I really have not. But I will say that Lisa Sorley, is the PIO, has been really great at getting messaging out there. And so if we bring this up to her within the EOC structure, and I think maybe it would be beneficial to have her craft some type of messaging to clarify kind of what the difference is for the community. And so that's definitely something I can bring up to her, and I'll let Mike speak more specifically to questions that he's been getting. The questions I've been getting have been much more focused on specific public health and safety. So, Mike, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I did have to field quite a few calls regarding the extension of the declaration, and it also got confused with the governor's extension of his declaration, and it also got confused with the date of the end date of the stay-at-home order. People were kind of reading them both together, so it is confusing. There's so much information out there, and the governor speaks daily, and I think that's a good thing, but I think it also confuses people. Mm-hmm. I had a lady call that needed to fly for an emergency and was afraid she couldn't even go to Duluth, and so I had to explain, that wasn't the case. And yes, very confusing. Yes, we definitely can get a message out to hopefully resolve some of them issues, for sure.
Okay, and I think the biggest confusion was that the first paragraph in the paper was about us voting on our declaration of state of emergency, and then the entire article was on stay at home, which in essence has nothing with our emergency declaration. So, and I know Lisa is getting out amazing information, but I want to make sure that it's getting into the paper, because that is what some people are reading. And I know it's really hard to do that because the paper only comes out once a week. Over.
Excuse me, Commissioners. One of the things that is coming out this week in the paper is a very good article written by Attorney Hicken that addresses what those different orders mean. So specifically the stay-at-home and what they mean. So hopefully there'll be some clarity in this week's paper. Over.
Very, very timely. Commissioner Storley, I didn't get a response from you. Do you have anything to comment for questions?
I'll try to get my words in edgewise. No, other than Grace and Mike, thank you for everything that you're doing. And I have also fielded emails and questions on the businesses, and I just say, just go by the governor's guidelines for now. We have until May 4th for that specific updating. Otherwise, he does update every day, which I faithfully watch. Thank you. Over.
Okay. And again, I thank you both for your work, and very important work during this time. So with that, we will go to the administrator update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and
Like to comment at this time?
yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm sure you all know by now that the Recycle Center was opened up last week, and this week we added a third day on Wednesday, so now it will be open on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I would just like to note that actually how the Recycle Center got closed and then opened back up is actually a pretty good model for other businesses as they figure out how to open up to minimize risk. As we open up and allow more traffic, we know that we also introduce more risk. And so how do you do that in a way to mitigate those risks? And the way the Recycle Center got opened up, well, first of all, it got shut down to do some deep cleaning and to figure out how we were going to change our processes. By opening it up just 2 days and really sending out some clear messaging about how people needed to bring their recyclables in, already sorted, clean, without garbage in them, some very clear messaging, which has always been there, but kind of we had everybody's attention, so it was a good time to get that out there again. Then only allowing 3 people at a time in the bay to do that kept things pretty safe, and making sure that our workers also had adequate masks and gloves as they handle the stuff. Then we found that we needed to let recyclables sit and sort of rest so that if there were any COVID virus on those materials, that they would basically go away just on their own by the fact that they just die on a metal, but it takes a couple of days. So once we did that process, we found a way to get into that rhythm. It's just like juggling in a way. You start juggling with 2 balls, and then somebody throws you a 3rd ball, and now you can rotate those things and make them happen, and that's kind of what we've done. So we will continue to monitor that process. Again, just in the same way that businesses, as they open, will need to monitor the process, and if we find that there's an issue, we may have to bring it back again, maybe back to 2 days, or maybe we can go to 4 days. This is it's a very fluid process, and we have a goal of keeping our staff safe, keeping the service going, and also keeping the public safe. So that means that we're monitoring it all the time, trying to see where it might need to be modified. This is the exact same exercise our businesses are starting to kind of go through and thinking about how to reopen. So another thing that is really impacted by the shutdown of everything is the census. Census workers are not able to get out in the field to distribute materials. So I've been on the radio talking about that, and that people can go ahead and go online, or there's a phone call, which I don't have memorized, but the 2020 census.gov, people can go on there. It takes 5 minutes. They don't need a packet. They don't need the 12-digit number. They can bypass it and go ahead and do that. Minnesota is #1 in the nation in response. Over 60% of Minnesotans have already responded. And of the 87 counties in Minnesota, Cook County has the distinction of being dead last. So it's been really trying to encourage people to get out there and complete their census and not wait for census workers who are being restricted right now to get to them. They will eventually, hopefully, be dropping off packets, but there's no reason to wait. So that's also been impacted by the pandemic. And then last, we continue to have our employees mostly working at home, and I think doing a good job working at home and keeping things moving along. We do have a drop box outside of the courthouse, so people can drop off their tax payments or mail or other correspondence to us. We have many services that people can engage in online, like e-permitting, and they can also always phone us. People have forwarded their phones to their home numbers, and somebody will call them back. So trying to keep things moving as usual, and that's what I have for this week. Anybody have any questions for me?
Okay. We'll do a roll call on any questions for our interim administrator. We'll start with Commissioner Storley.
No questions. Thanks, Rena.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Dukert.
No questions. Thank you for everything you're working on and the update on the recycle center. That's very helpful for local businesses figuring out how to reopen. Over.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeShaw.
No questions.
Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rena, for the update. I do not have any questions at this time. Over.
Okay, then I guess I just want to thank our interim administrator for all the work that she's doing. I mentioned before being in charge of 2 departments, and now we're going to be facing the highway issue. Well, I shouldn't talk about that, but thank you so much for what you're doing. Well, we are scheduled to have a committee of the whole meeting at 11, but I'm going to ask Attorney Hicken would it be okay for me to adjourn this and go on to the committee of the whole, or should we wait till 11 o'clock?
So actually, it was scheduled at 10, as well as the special meeting, I think, just as a continuation.
Okay. So then I'll go ahead and just adjourn the special meeting, and then we'll go into the committee of the whole, which will be discussion, question and answer. And just excuse me here, I got to grab a different set of papers on the floor.
Got to vote on that?
Pardon me?
Do we got to vote on the adjournment? No.
I don't know. Do we need to officially vote on the adjournment of the special meeting?
That, I would certainly welcome a motion in that regard. Thank you. I didn't know if I had to or not. I'll ask for a motion to close the special meeting.
Motion to adjourn. Dukert. Over.
We have a second.
Second, Storley.
Okay. We'll do a roll call on that then. Commissioner DeShaw.
Aye.
Commissioner Dukert.
Aye. Over.
Commissioner Mills.
This is Commissioner Mills. Aye. Over.
Commissioner Storley.
Aye. Over.
Commissioner Bershine. Aye. Okay. We will adjourn the meeting. And I will call the meeting, the committee of the whole work session to order. We had some items sent to us on minutes and so forth. And then we'll have a discussion on, I believe we'll start, I grabbed the wrong one. I guess we'll start with the property tax relief discussion. We could turn that over to our auditor at this time.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'm going to turn to the attachments that came with your agenda and just start with the Department of Revenue. That was the third one in your attachment. It just addresses some of the questions that people have had around the state. Does the county need approval from other taxing jurisdictions to abate penalties and interest? And the answer to that is no, but we should consult with them.
which we have done. And I'll just leave it at that for now. Second question, does abating penalty for late payment affect the timeline for settlement and distribution of revenue? No, it does not. The timing of tax collections, the timing of the payment, that's all in statute. Only the legislature can change that. So we still collect taxes on May 15th. We distribute them. Some of them early payments to the state, to the school in late May, and then there's a date in June by which we have to distribute them to other taxing entities. That doesn't change, no matter what actions we might take in the next week or two. Can the Department of Revenue delay May 15th due date for property taxes? No, they cannot. The county can't, Department of Revenue cannot, only the legislature can. Can a county delay the May 15th due date for property taxes? Same answer. County cannot. Department of Revenue cannot. When can the county abate penalty and interest for late payment? So the county can do that when they find that the penalty is unjust and unreasonable. It says in the question interest. There's no interest at this time. Interest only comes after January when payments become delinquent. So at this time during the current year, it's just a late penalty. And counties can abate penalties if they're considered unjust or unreasonable. You get to decide what that means. Any questions on that?
Okay, we'll go through a roll call on that. For comments on that, we'll start with Commissioner DeShaw.
I have no questions.
Okay. Commissioner Storley?
No questions at this time. Over.
Commissioner Mills?
Are you asking just about that last handout?
Yes.
Right.
No questions. No questions. Over. Thank you.
Commissioner Duker?
So Brady, we're the pass-through for other entities. So if someone does not pay their taxes, do we still send the amount they would have paid to the other entities on our regular timeline? Or if...
No.
Okay. So if people do not pay...
We will pay what we've received. The tax system is set up to distribute it based upon the levies that all the various entities put in and their valuations, et cetera. So that's going to be, a calculation, a very complicated calculation that comes out, and you get what you get. We're each going to get our relative percentage of whatever is received at that date.
Okay, and the date, and by statute, you have to pay by certain dates. So if people don't pay until July 15th, that first half payment may be lower to the other entities.
Yes.
Okay. Over.
Okay. And I don't have any questions or comments.
Okay. Then I think I'll just go next to the first attachment, which is a spreadsheet, McCatfo, which is the Association of County Auditors, Treasurers, Finance Officers. We took this poll a couple of weeks ago on April 6th. It just gives you a sense of where other counties, the ones that responded, where they were on this issue. And as you can see, if you've read it, they're all in the same, they were 2 weeks ago, pretty much in the same place we are discussing it. Most of them wanted to see some state guidance just so that, especially I think counties that are closely packed together with other counties surrounding them, they're really sensitive to having one policy in their county and a different policy in the other 3 counties that border them, for example. And so that was a predominant theme there, but they're all discussing whether or not to delay penalties for a period of time, or whether to reduce the amount of penalties. And some have chosen to do that, and many of them are on the same schedule. They're probably discussing it yesterday, today, tomorrow. They're kind of in the same place that you are. If you look down for Cook County, and I said the same, basically that we've seen several requests and questions from businesses and homeowners. We're discussing it. I expect there will be some kind of relief. We're considering a delay in penalties. We'll discuss it on April 21st. And then I mentioned that advanced tax payments is an option for taxing districts. That's kind of a very specific thing that's always in place. What it means is if we did delay, we receive less, say in May, in this first payment, one of our taxing entities in July or August is in some difficulty making a payment, we can advance what we've collected to that date on an estimate. So we would do our best estimate, and then we can advance what we've collected, let's say about to August 1st. So we could help another tax entity in that manner. That's in the statute. Then I think, unless you have questions on that section of those county responses, do you want to stop and ask if there are any questions on those responses? Otherwise, I'll move on to the...
Well, I guess I would like to offer each commissioner just their, thinking in this regard about a tax relief, whether it would be, it is going to be an abatement from what I understand, and then what kind of penalty structure would we have if we started new, if it was delayed 2 months or whatever it is, and I think those are understood. So I think it would be good, because this will be an agenda item next week, from my understanding.
Mr. Chair, before you do that, then, if there were any specific questions on those county comments, I'd like to go through the AMC model. It's the last attachment.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so AMC has worked on this because they've heard from all of us, probably all 87 counties, and they've listened to all the comments, all the questions, and they've kind of summarized it here in this guidance, Matt Hilgert. The model proposal is based on Statute 279. It's allowing county boards to delay penalties, and they put in, under this model proposal, a late payment until July 15th or any certain date decided by the board. That was kind of an average from what they had heard. Escrowed accounts are still expected to pay on time, and that's because escrows have already collected the money, and so there's no need for them to have a delay in payment. They should pay those taxes on time. The delay in penalties is only intended to afford flexibility to those residents and businesses impacted by the COVID-19 virus. Residents and businesses planning to make payment on May 15th and not financially impacted by COVID-19 should continue to make those payments. That's especially important for all of the taxing entities, the cities, the towns, the hospital, the school, the EDA, the state itself, gets the state property tax. And under this guidance model, late penalties would resume again with this model on July 16th or a different date if you picked a different date. County checklist. Have a discussion at board and staff level to make sure everyone understands all proposals and there's a consensus on a plan to move forward. Understand which percentages of your taxpayers pay via escrow accounts. Ours are not very high. statewide, we collect about $800,000 a year in escrow. Not as many people escrow their payments up here. They're not required to. So we don't have that guaranteed amount of money as some of them do. But to give you a sense of where we are, we've been tracking our collections. And last year, on April 20th, we had collected $1.717 million in current taxes. Courtney just checked yesterday morning, and we had collected $1,882,000 this year. So we are about $165,000 ahead of last year, which is a good sign. It means the people who tend to pay early have not changed their habits. They're still paying early, and they're paying a little bit ahead of schedule. So that's understanding your escrow accounts, but in our case, too, it's understanding who is normally paying at this time, and they still are. We don't see any change in that. The next thing is analyze the potential impact to county cash flow and reserves. Determine whether your county has the capacity to go without a portion of their planned revenue stream for a certain amount of time. Honestly, in the short run, let's say until several months to the second payment date in October, we would have no difficulty given our fund balance and our cash balance. We have over $9 million in our unallocated fund balance. We can go many, many months if we have to. It's more problem potentially for some of our other taxing entities, but this may go on, the impacts of this may go on a long time. So after this model, we can move to where we've looked at what can we save, what can we cut in 2020, because the financial impact may extend beyond this summer into next fall, into the winter. So we've looked at that. So now we'll just continue here. Reach out to local governments within the county border so that they understand the effects on their finances. So I've made that contact with the hospital, the city, the school, the towns, the EDA, and all of them have analyzed it, and they feel comfortable that they can manage, let's say I gave them this model of assume a 2-month delay on penalties and an impact. I said worst case, let's say 50%, maybe it's 25%, maybe it's less. My guess is it's less than 25% in the end, but I gave them those scenarios, and they all felt they could manage that. Put together a communication plan, board resolution, fact sheet, etc. So that would come following today's meeting and any action next week. If we required an application, we would have to have an application form. If you saw up there, Pro-Wing, for example, they have a more detailed plan where they are only providing for homestead and abatement of penalty for those that actually, at least at that time, for those that are filed for unemployment and for businesses that have been closed by the governor's order. So under those cases, you would probably be gathering information from people in order to provide them with an abatement. If we did the more general plan, we would not be doing that. And so forth. I won't get into the technicalities of auditor, treasurer, assigned duties. It's all combined under the auditor, treasurer, etc. So now I would ask for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? We'll start with Commissioner Dukert.
Yeah, Brady, I'm going to ask you to go back in time. The Ham Lake fire was on May 5th, which is incredibly close to the due date. And I'm thinking what's going to happen with this situation may be similar to that situation, and that would be that they were able to make their May 15th payment, but the payment that became a problem was the October payment. So I'm thinking that maybe as a board, we're going to have to revisit this when that payment comes. Do you have any recollection?
I don't remember that in particular. I don't doubt that. I think this is, as other have stated, this is a fluid situation, and we're making the best decisions we can right now, trying to look forward, but knowing, we're unsure what's going to happen with the governor's order when it expires, how businesses are going to be affected, to what degree they'll be able to open up. Will they be able to earn? How much revenue will they be able to earn this summer? Will it be a continuing problem into the fall and into the winter? It's hard to answer at this point. And I think
that would be my...
We just have to be ready and be flexible and keep monitoring the situation.
Yeah, that's my suggestion to my fellow commissioners, is that we review this again in September. Obviously, we need to make a decision on this now, but notoriously, Cook County is shut down in April. Many businesses are closed for all of April and some of March and some of May. It's a different situation, obviously, with this, than others have been forced to shut down when they wouldn't normally shut down. But I think that the effects are going to continue to hit us throughout the year. And if there's a soft open, and if people have to open, like Rena said about our recycle center, if businesses are forced to not have walk-in traffic or walk-up window traffic, or only a couple of days a week, I think that's where we're going to see the impact. So I would like the board to not forget this when the next tax payment comes up. And those are all my questions at this time. Over.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner DeShaw?
I kind of had the same questions as, or comments as Heidi. It's definitely going to have to get revisited if the businesses don't pick back up and people get back to work. So that's all I got.
Commissioner DeShaw, I could not hear you. Could you repeat that, please? It was just low in volume.
I have to, kind of the same comments as Commissioner Dukirk had there with revisiting this. If we don't, people don't get back to work right away and the businesses don't get going there, we're definitely going to have to revisit this, so.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Commissioner Thorley?
Well, I appreciate the fact that Brady reached out to the other entities, EDA, school, township, hospital, and the fact that they could carry on for beyond, around a 2-month delay. So that part is encouraging, but I agree with the two former commissioners that we should revisit this in September. And as Brady says, it's a very fluid situation. Maybe we have to go week by week. I don't know. It's tough with businesses right now and their flow and lack of. So I think flexibility is the key word here. Over.
Thank you. Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brady, for laying it out there for us. And I thought it was really helpful reading the other counties' discussions, or at least their auditors. One thing that I'm reading in this model proposal from AMC is a delay in penalties is only intended to afford flexibility to those residents and businesses impacted by COVID-19. And what I'm wondering, in your opinion, as well as the rest of the board's opinion, is how much weight we should put on that. And obviously, we want to encourage everyone to make the payments if they can. But where I'm going is it worth having that application? Is that going to put more burden on your department? Will you be able to handle that? It would get kind of tricky in how we decide what is on the application, how that's determined, or do we just do it kind of on your honor system? Over.
I would opt for the honor system in Cook County. I have a lot of faith. Partly it's our situation. We have a lot of retired people, semi-retired, who presumably are not impacted by having lost a job or lost a significant amount of work because of the virus. And so they'll be able to pay, presumably. And we're seeing that right now. The evidence is the payments coming in being higher than last year. It's a small number. It's a small subset of the total payments. And I'll know a lot more in another week before you make a formal decision, because collections will continue. So that gives me a good feeling, number one. Number two, we have internet connectivity up here, and there's a lot of people can work from home, like all of us, the county government, and others who are still drawing a paycheck, and there's no reason in the world for us not to make our payments on time. And then the third is, I think people here will respond and not take advantage of it. I think they recognize, especially if we remind them, that it's the services that go to themselves and their families, etc., from all of the taxing entities here, and they need every dollar that you can give them. And so my hope is that the wild card is more probably the seasonal owners that aren't here and aren't listening to this, to get that word to them to please don't take advantage of this unless you really, really need to. That would be that's the one I have the least confidence in, but I have a lot of confidence in the other side.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess for my turn on commenting, I'd really like to reinforce that. We've talked about this a little bit, a couple times, and I remember in our history, Franklin Delano Roosevelt with the New Deal, when he shut down the banks and opened them up again, really emphasized to the people that, we have a plan here to help those that need it, but we have to have the cooperation of all those others that can, deposit their money, or in this case, pay their taxes. And knowing the people that Cook County and how they step up and when they're needed, I really feel quite confident that we're going to get, sufficient amount of funds. So I think that's what we have to do is we're putting a plan in place to help those that need the help, but we all got to do our part and emphasize paying. I think also, I know that we had some discussion on Monday in regards to, we only can abate, but we can adjust the penalties. And, that's another issue that we'll have to I think, make a decision on. If we delay it, let's say 2 months, then the penalties would start, anew again, like they were just in the beginning, going back to May, or would we go to the other plan where I think in July or something it'd be a 5% penalty.
Correct.
I would like us to seriously consider that we start anew with the penalties for those so that we can maximize the benefit for those that hopefully need it, and I think we'll be confident to do that. So that's where I would lean on this. I could be convinced otherwise, but I really think we should really focus on helping those that we can and asking for the others to help with that. That's the end of my comments, I guess. Any other comments or questions on this topic? Just maybe state your name and we won't go through roll call again. If I don't hear anything in about 10 seconds, or we'll move on.
This is Commissioner Disha.
Yes, go ahead.
I think we need to give the taxpayers the same opportunity as we gave the people on the revolving loan fund. We can't penalize people if they're not working. We're going to relook at their thing in September or October, whenever that was there. But I think we need to treat the people the same way as we did the people on the revolving loan fund.
So you're suggesting a different time frame, the same time frame, like 6 months, or?
Well, I just don't think we need to start penalizing them right away, 2 months out there. We basically gave the people that are participating in the revolving loan fund a free ride for the whole summer. So, a lot of these taxpayers might be the ones that are working for them businesses, and, if they're not going to open, we need to definitely give them the people the same opportunity.
So you're suggesting we do this for 6 months?
I'm not suggesting anything there. I think we just need to,
Okay.
we're going to have to revisit it at a regular meeting. I'm sure we can't make decisions here, so.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments?
This is Commissioner Mills, and I really appreciate where Commissioner Deshaw is coming from, and tend to agree with them there. Over.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. We'll go on to 2020 budget reduction estimates, and that is to our auditor as well. And at some point in time, we need to have our human resources director, so that she sent out a email on explaining furloughs and so forth.
Mr. Chair?
Should we go to that now, or should we go back to Brady? Brady, would you like to address, start it off, or should?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair?
Oh, go ahead.
This is Commissioner Mills. I had a further question that just popped into my head for Brady, and I guess I was just curious what normal dollar amount we see for late fees or penalties. Over.
Oh, what is the norm? The norm, it starts for most classifications at, May 15th is the due date, May 16th.
No, I'm sorry.
Is that what you're talking about?
Just the total dollar amount. Like year by year, I assume you budget for that.
Yes, we budget for that. It's in the, let me see if I've got it open here. We budgeted between delinquent
delinquent penalty, we budgeted 45,000 this year, 50,000 last year, and we bounced somewhere between 46 and 55,000 or so that we collect in delinquent penalty. So
Thank you.
that's if we gave up all penalty this year, that's the kind of deficit we'd see somewhere in that, well, certainly we'd lose our budget amount, probably 45,000, but potentially even more than that.
Mr. Chair, this is Rena. I'm wondering
Yeah.
if I could make a kind of a preparatory statement to the next part. So, as commissioners, as you're deciding what you want to extend to the citizens of Cook County and property owners, we wanted to make sure that you had the information to understand impacts and where we could save off of the current budget, and what other options we might have going forward as this year unfolds, and we don't really know how much worse or how much longer things could be closed down. So the next piece that Brady was going to show you are places where we went back through our budget and looked at things that could either be postponed, savings that are just currently happening, like travel because nobody's traveling, positions that could be postponed, projects that could be postponed. And then the other part of that discussion after Brady runs through that will be with our HR director, Pamela Dixon, to just talk about furloughs versus layoffs, neither of which I am proposing, but depending on how things go in the future, they may be things that we have to look at. I don't want to, but they may be things we need to look at. And so I wanted to make sure that she could go through how each of those, the pros and cons, and just a definition of those in our environment. So I just wanted to say that before we went in to the detail, just give you a little context why we were looking at those details. That's all. Over.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll just move on to then our Human Resources Director, Pamela Dixon, and could you just, are you on with us, Pam?
I am, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So would you go ahead with that, please? Any comments you have
Certainly.
or explanations?
I emailed a document to the commissioners this morning, and that document lays out the definitions of a furlough compared to a layoff. Essentially, a furlough is a temporary unpaid leave from work. And what that might look like is you may decide that some employees will take 1 day off, unpaid leave per week. So they're working 4-day weeks, or it may look like 1 week out of a month. So there's flexibility in how that's structured, but in essence, they are still employees with the county. They have reduced hours. Compared to a layoff, where it is an employer-initiated termination of employment. It could be temporary or it could be permanent. So you could decide that a layoff will last for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 1 year, up to 2 years. There's some flexibility in timing there. Or you may decide that a position or positions would be laid off on a permanent basis. Some of the details that you would need to look at are first and foremost our collective bargaining agreements that really inform how that would work. As I reviewed those and what is listed in a table on the document that I sent you, for each of our collective bargaining agreements, I reviewed the language around both furlough and layoff. In none of our contracts, as well as our employee handbook, is furlough described or even mentioned. So there's no guidelines to follow there. But layoff is. And so I've outlined for each of the collective bargaining agreements with CCEA, the 49ers, and LELS, the particular article and section that speaks to that language. And then also within each of those contracts, there are management rights that are described, which has language around our ability as a company, an organization, to establish and modify the structure or to select, assign, direct, and determine the number of personnel. So giving us the right to make these types of decisions when needed. So I've listed that language there so that you have that for review. When you look at the 49ers and the LELS specifically, seniority becomes an issue in terms of how we would manage layoffs. So that language is listed in that table as well. Essentially, last one in, first one out. So it's got that inverse relationship. And then also for recall. In our employee handbook, it does outline that employees may be temporarily or permanently laid off from work. Similar language to the other contracts due to abolitionment of position, lack of funds, shortage of work, or other reasons beyond the control of the employee. Decision to lay off shall be made by the county board after consultation with department heads and the county administrator, and employees shall be given as much notice as possible. In terms of applicable employment laws, the big ones are the EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity, and our Minnesota State Human Rights that state it's necessary to document our business line of thinking, rationale, the alternatives considered, and the decisions that were made. This documentation will help us avoid or defend potential claims that we were unlawfully discriminatory in that process. The WARN Act, which is a law that private sectors, and I'm familiar with, private sectors have to respond to, is not applicable for the public sector. And the primary provision in that act is that we would need to give employees 30 days notice to abide by that act. So there is no notification timeline according to those two laws or according to the contracts with our collective bargaining units. As you go further into the document, really where laws become more applicable beyond EEO and human rights are how we handle benefits, particularly health care. And what informs us here is the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, that we do have to comply with. And essentially, if we were to furlough employees, they would still be employees. And as long as they are working 30 hours a week, they would remain on health care benefits if they were full-time employees prior to going into a furlough situation. For a layoff, they're no longer employees with the county, and so we would have no obligations there to continue active coverage. COBRA is available to laid off employees. It would also be available to furloughed employees who fell under those 30 hours per week. So they were no longer eligible for our health care, so they could fall into that COBRA situation. And under both situations, furlough and layoff, unemployment benefits are available for them. They're eligible for that. Who covers the cost of coverage? I went into that. If they are no longer an employee with us and they go into COBRA, they could pay up to 102% of the cost of that coverage. They also have the option to go through the ACA exchange, the Minnesota exchange, to find coverage in that way too. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt in the HR realm around the fact that Trump decided not to open up the exchange for many people who didn't have insurance prior. So that's not even an option for them anymore. But because of our employees, our full-time employees, have had coverage, they would have access to that exchange. And then again, when employees were furloughed, who are eligible for coverage, generally it's that 30 hours a week that we look at as the threshold. So those are some high-level guidelines for you to consider as you're thinking through this part of your tax relief discussion and how to potentially save dollars in the budget. So I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Okay, we'll go starting with Commissioner Storley. Any questions?
Thank you.
Or-
No, I don't have any questions other than to thank you, Pamela, for putting this together for us. I think this is something that has been needed, and I thank you for doing this, and hopefully we, as we look at our budget, will have better guidelines. Over.
Thank you. Commissioner DeShaw?
No questions. Thanks, Pam.
Okay. Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Pam. I don't have any questions right now. Over.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dukert?
My only concern is a petty one, and that is that when these items are on the agenda, it creates anxiety amongst the staff, and they often believe that an agenda item means that we're planning to take action. So I don't know if maybe in the future there's a way to reach out and just say that these are discussions that need to be had. You know, I don't know how you address it, but I have had employees ask me, is the board considering doing this? So just trying to keep anxiety levels low and let our staff know that this is not our knee-jerk first reaction, and that we know how important each and every one of them is to the whole. Over.
Thank you. I guess I would reiterate that this is information only, and it's just needed, I think, to look at in these times. Hopefully we don't have to go to any extremes. Okay, so with that, let's go on then to further discussion on information that our auditor has in regards to the budget, what can be done this year. You sent out something just recently, I think today.
Yeah,
So, Braden,
an updated
would you
version.
Go back to that? Yes.
Yeah, so I'll
Hopefully
just
everyone email.
highlight this. This is a mixture of things that if things continue as they are now, we're going to save. As you'll see, you go down the line, travel-related savings are an obvious one, as we're doing most things online now. And some of the numbers in here are just a guess, because will things open up later? Will you be attending some things? Hard to know at this point. We placed a number in here for commissioners to save $17,900 travel-related and leave $10,000. Travel-related means mileage, hotels, registration, all of that. So within all of that, leaving $10,000 in case there were your annual meetings, et cetera, towards the end of the year, if that was viable. For myself and the assessor, I could save $5,000 in travel costs. I did not put that on here because we are almost assuredly going to lose more in revenue from passport fees, from lodging tax fees. We take a percentage of that as our management, and almost assuredly we will lose more in those fees than we would save. So there's no point in adding that here as a net savings. Same issue for the assessor's office. Down to the IT director, Rita had a new halftime staff that she would give up, saving about $26,000. Travel savings there of about $6,000. I've added back the slight increase she received for acting as the administrator, $4,990.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Mel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brady, when you're going through this, instead of, or maybe not instead of, in addition to the departments, could you talk about the item number or the line?
The number, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay, thank you. Over.
Yeah, so the first, so I'm going right from top to bottom, and 01 is the Commissioner's Department, 40, we already talked about it, was the auditors, 45, the assessor. Right now, 60 is the IT director, and that's Rena, who is offering up her approved half-hour staff, $6,000 of travel savings, and we're paying her salary out of that department. It's about $4,990 higher because of her administrator duties. That's a negative because it's an addition. But you drop down to 65 is the administrator department. We are saving $164,659, which was budgeted for the administrator role. Assuming that this goes on, we do not hire another administrator, she manages to hang with us through the end of the year, that's potential saving. Netted with that $4,990. There's a staff development line in Department 65 administrator that has not been touched yet, so that's a potential. There's travel savings in that department of about $3,000. There's savings in some software costs. We couldn't identify everything that Jeff had budgeted there, but the ones that we know of and think, we still think we could cut $7. And then added back some of the reclassification as an offset that wasn't budgeted for Pam. The attorney's office does not have anything to offer this time. They $500 from the I'm sorry, the attorney is 90. Sorry, 100 is the recorder. She has one conference plan that she'll forego for $500. 120 is the oh shoot. That's the veteran service officer. She has $1,000 of travel. She'll forego 200. Department 200 is the sheriff. Here he has a dispatcher vacancy, along with some travel. There's a $67,000 that could be saved. Half of his capital cost. You're setting aside $60,000 a year for armor radio replacement. Delay that and save $60,000 from the budget. He's indicated there's up to $70,000 of jail services that he thinks he could save, and 1 month must also be a vacancy for a deputy position. And of course, he would want to come and discuss these with you in detail before we made any hard decisions. This is just to tell you what we've identified that we can potentially reduce our budget. Down to land services, $3,000 from the environmental budget, that's professional travel. $13,200 from the recycle budget for professional services, that's trucking, et cetera, travel, equipment. $9,500 from the zoning administrator budget, again, that's professional services and travel. He offered up a potential to cut the staff back from 40 to 35. That was the staff that was dealing with the vacation rental permit system. And I didn't put a number in there, but that's a potential. Diane Booth, 509, that's the community center, the building itself. And she says the utility savings are going to be more than offset by the revenue loss from groups in her estimation, so no savings there. She also mentions that there appears to be a leak in the compressor system, so this will probably affect the building fund, actually. In the YMCA, which is 536, we've identified 40,000. Actually, that should be the line down. I just moved it into utilities because the pool area is shut down, and we're saving on that, and the exercise rooms are not drawing any heat, et cetera. So there's still some minimal heat, light in the building, as it does have some uses, child care and showering, et cetera. And some of the other savings we don't have all the numbers in yet, but are probably offset by some of the repairs that had to be done to the pool. We figure we've used up the capital costs that were budgeted. We'll know more about that later. Department 600, that's the extension office. She's offered up her travel remaining in that budget and the Incredible Exchange program. 603 is soil and water. They say they do not have anything they can offer in their minimal budget. Fund 11 is Public Health Human Services. They've offered up $2,250 in administration travel, a delay in the public health educator position, hiring of that, $21,000, a delay in the SUD coordinator, at least until September. That would save $57,000. And they have split some costs on the forensic interview equipment with the sheriff and attorney, which saves them $7,860. And then in Fund 12, the building committee, you might have heard this, some of you have heard this. There was $80,000 planned in that $251,000 building fund budget this year for the camera system. Marina says that they could install a $5,000 backup, and we can cut the $75,000 from that cost this year. Tim says we can delay the waste oil replacement up at the recycle center for $10,000. We can delay the courthouse south steps, which was budgeted for $20,000, and there was a savings of $1,000 in the recycle security cameras. The total of all of these is $704,398 in potential savings, and that's on our $10,300,000 and some odd thousand levy. So that when you look at, say, the loss in revenue from penalties and interests, call that $50,000. Any other loss in delayed property tax, or people not being able to make their property tax this year. So you can see that there's some coverage by some of these savings if needed, even without going to our fund balance. Just to give you a sense of it.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
We'll start off with questions or comments. Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Brady, for putting this together. It's really hard to know, it's impossible to know right now what we're going to be facing in the future. And, I understand that our community needs immediate relief. And I think, taking a good look at our budget is a step in the right direction there. Going through it, though, I just want to note that it seemed to me a significant amount were delays, and so I don't disagree with them. I think we can delay these things, but I just want us to be sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot. If depending on how long this goes out, and how long we need to continue to support our community with our services, and just trying to find that balance. And but I really appreciate this step here, and I guess I don't have any questions at the moment, but I anticipate maybe some will come through our discussion here. Over.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Starley?
Well, thanks, Brady. Appreciate getting to the inner sanctum of all this, because most of this is what affects us as commissioners, as department people, as we'll look at all of this. I don't see where we're going to be, having any services jeopardized, at least at this point. So, I think the department heads have done a great job in looking at it right now. They may be able to trim some more, who knows, but what they've done right now is to be commended. And I would have to ask Brady, before we adjourn later, what is your opinion about when the budget committee will start?
I would.
I think we're straight now. Would you like to do that one?
Yeah, I would like to take that up in the next item on the agenda, if we could.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
That was my response.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else, Commissioner Starley?
No, thank you. Over.
Okay. Commissioner DeShaw?
No comment.
Commissioner Dukert?
Yeah, I had some concerns about putting the steps off, but I see that it was discussed during the building committee. My concern with putting things off is that it will cost more later to fix it, as we've learned the hard way over history, but I leave it in the hands of the building committee to make those good decisions, so I don't have any questions. Over.
Okay. As far as Commissioner Bersheim here, this is very helpful. I think, as it was mentioned, it's a temporary thing, but it is important. I imagine we'll get into this in our next discussion piece on the goals for next year's budget, but I also would like to remind the commissioners that we were informed by Secretary Sinsky from the United States Department of Agriculture that when we look at budget, we've got to keep in mind that the reappraisal is in effect, even though we have a 2-year, grace period here with previous payments. He stated that we should go forward in our budget planning to remember that we could be $750,000 less in revenue from that Thybotnik funding. So that's part of this mix. And I only mention it because it's a pretty close match to the $700,000 for grace period of 1 year, if all things work, of course. the way we can. So, yeah, we've got a lot of discussion. So, I think if there's no other comments on that topic, then we'll move into that discussion on 2020 budget goals. And Interim Administrator Rogers, would you like to start that one off, or Brady, would you like to go on that one?
I'll take this one.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
This is Commissioner Mills. I'm sorry, I missed if Commissioner DeShaw had any questions or comments on this last round.
Oh, over. Commissioner DeShaw, I believe I called on you, but correct me if I was wrong.
Yeah, you called on me. I didn't have no comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sorry. I just missed that. I'm sorry. Over.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so Interim Administrator Rogers, would you like to start this one up?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. So this is about the time of year, usually early May, when we start asking the department heads to plan their next year's budget. So we're looking at the 2021 budget. And so this discussion, ultimately, I'm going to ask you all, if not today, by next week, to let me know what your priorities are for this budget season and what areas you would like to see included in budget planning. But I'd like to start by going through what I believe are some basic assumptions and constraints in this process as I think about it. And I would like to also address what Commissioner DeKirk said about having these conversations as they relate to employees. And I thought I was clear, but layoffs or furloughs are not, they have not been at all what I would like to do. In fact, what we've done by identifying other places where we could capture savings is trying to avoid that at all costs. But I have no idea where this is going, and there may be more difficult decisions ahead. But it's always my intent to try to protect our employees for a lot of reasons. It's very expensive to do layoffs. They end up costing you a lot of money. They impact services, and we're generally only one deep in most of our services anyway. But it affects people and families that are also part of this community, and so they become more people in the community that don't have income and aren't able to pay their taxes and are hurt by this. So there are lots of impacts to doing using our employees to balance the budget, and I personally would like to avoid those at all costs. But I still think it's prudent for at least people to understand what the options are and what the impacts are in terms of their benefits, that sort of thing. So my first assumption is this is going to go on for a while, and our businesses are worried about their very survival. I hear pretty regularly from Jim Boyd and from Linda Jurek that businesses are already talking about filing for bankruptcy. They are worried about when they can open, and even if they open, that they will not have enough revenue to meet their expenses. I think they will open up, and we will see an increase. When they open up, we will see an increase in COVID-19. We know that. And we may have to move backwards again. These are my assumptions based on what I'm hearing from the public health community. Another assumption is a closed business means reduced taxes and people's inability to pay, and if people go out of business, then they're lost from the tax rolls altogether. The community, I think, already expects us and will expect us to present a minimum impact budget next year. And will look for us to find creative ways to support businesses and individual taxpayers, not just in our levy, but in other ways too. Special programs, whatever we can find to leverage for the local environment. And another assumption would be if Cook County has a COVID outbreak, we may lose key members of our staff and need to hire or have services provided by contractual relationships. We didn't lose our highway engineer to COVID-19, but we know that we're going to have a resignation. It'll be on the board meeting next week. And so filling that position right now will likely be difficult, but we also may have to fill that through a contractual relationship, and that may be less money or it may be more money. And then to Commissioner Dukirk's comment that when we postpone capital investments, when we get out of the practice of maintaining things on a regular basis and replacing things in a timely way, that can lead to higher costs and unexpected costs. So this whole reactive way of thinking about this budget bothers me because it's different than the way I like to think about it. I like to say, you budget this much every year and then things don't surprise you, and so we got to find a balance there too. Things that are so radical or so cut the budget so dramatically can end up biting us when a system fails and it has to be replaced. Some of the constraints I think you need to consider, I think Commissioner Bersheim mentioned Ty Blatnick. This is going to go on for another year and a half before we have an answer about the new assessment. And so the extra money that we're getting, although it can sit there in a fund balance and help us extend tax payments, it's not something we can spend or count on until we get that new assessment. Another constraint is that we don't act unilaterally. The hospital, the school, the city, the townships, volunteer fire departments are all impacted by late taxes. And so we need to always keep them in mind. And our level of services that we're required to maintain by the state, particularly in human services and public safety, those and actually in our land services areas, we're mandated to perform certain services, and so we can't just say, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. We don't need that staff. In many cases, we're told that we have to have that staff. And then last is sort of a constraint and a consumption is we need to begin this process in May, and we're doing it, here's my assumption, without a complete picture of what the future holds for the rest of the year. So those are all things that are sort of on my mind as I'm kind of starting to think about this process. Some of the basics that I think we can say to department heads as they plan their budgets, and you may agree or disagree with those, but it might be no new projects are implemented this next year. Or, we have negotiations coming up with bargaining units this year. That's always a place that we know our future spending is affected by. We may decide to have a no new hire requests. You might say, yep, next year don't even ask for new positions in your staff. You may not do that. We might want to have a temporary replacement policy about certain criteria for when staff leaves or retires and we need to replace them. How do we determine if we can get by without that staff in the short term or the long term? And then I think there's also a place we can look for opportunities and cooperative agreements like the ones we had with Lake County for highway department engineer. Maybe there are other cooperative agreements when staff leave or retire for whatever reason. We've been looking at doing what the sheriff's department does with enterprise car leasing as a way to save money on our car, our fleet, that we use for people doing field work and people doing traveling to meetings in different counties. And right now, our fleet is very old. Every car in that fleet is over 10 years old. And so they are expensive. They are expensive from a maintenance point of view. They're expensive from fuel. And so we've been looking at getting into a leasing thing where we could replace those cars and lower and standardize our costs. With newer cars, it would be more efficient and more cost effective and lower some of those other costs. And so, I'll be looking for some direction. Do you want more information about opportunities like that, or do you think you'd rather postpone those for a while? So, as we look at this conversation, I know I'm personally going to be looking for direction on what you would like as a board for me to relay to department heads as they start planning their budget. And second of all, I would like direction on what you see as the role for the Budget Advisory Committee. Certainly, this is an unusual year. We're not doing in-person meetings, so the format that was used with that group before probably doesn't make sense. Do you want them to help develop those goals for next year? There's a whole long way that you could look at it. You could say, well, we're only going to have X amount for a levy increase, and just state that right away, and then that kind of informs the way we plan our budgets. There's a lot of ways we could go after this, and honestly, I haven't been in this seat before doing this role for a whole organization. So definitely looking for your direction as a board. That's what I've got. Over.
Okay, thank you. So let's go around for comments that you'd like to make in regard to your statements on assumptions and restraints and constraints, or any other thoughts about goals for setting the budget next year. And then I think we'll try to maybe also, after this, go to a discussion of the role of the budget committee as a next discussion item that we'll go through on a roll call. So let's start off with questions, comments, and goals for next year. Commissioner DeShaw.
Yeah, I think last year when we, with that Ty Blotnick thing there, the money that didn't come in or did come in, we definitely can't be putting that money into our budget. And I think this year we're going to have to look at every department and find cuts anywhere we can to make sure that we don't end up with a levy. If we could stay flat with the levy. And I also agree with what Rena said there, besides our one position that's going to have to get filled after the resignation next week there, I think we do need to look at a hiring freeze in the county there. And we've been hearing that for many years now, the last couple of years anyway there, that the staffing seems to be too high at the county level here, and I agree with that myself. So it's going to be a tough year for the budget committee, I know that. Over.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My biggest priority is trying to help our community recover and go forward, kind of with this new paradigm with the virus. And it may not be a super long-term change in the way our community operates, but I think at least I mean, it sounds like, for 2 years, it's reasonable to think that it's not going to be business as usual. And so, obviously we always want to try to keep our costs down. We're all taxpayers. We don't want to be throwing money away. And at the same time, I'm trying to balance how do we get some more stability in our community during this pandemic? What tools might we have that we haven't thought of because this is a new and drastic time are out there? In general, I agree with Commissioner Deschamps about the hiring freeze. The engineer position, I think, is extremely important. Another, I'm maybe not on the same page as far as the public health educator is concerned. I think that position in this time is quite important, but I'm willing to talk more about that and hear more about that. But I think, taking that long view and that step back, it comes down to our values, and I don't want to put money as our number one value. Saving money, that's not my number one value. My number one value is the health of our community and the well-being of our community, and that includes the health of our economy in our community. And so I'm trying to wrestle with how can we do that? What resources do we have? Whether it be just we have this revolving loan fund. Is there a way we can leverage county resources to help the businesses that are very likely going bankrupt? What are our needs? And our needs are continually changing and growing at a drastic rate. And so I don't want to cut our hands off so that we can't catch people when they fall and we can't help people. I want to look at our tools and see what we can do. But of course, any money we spend is coming from the same community that we're trying to help, and so just trying to navigate that net balance. I want to take a good hard look at that, and so what I would ask of the budget committee is to take that step back and to start out from the values. What does our community need? What are our weaknesses, and especially now in this time, and then to go from there. And I mean, I think we can all agree that we'd rather pay fewer taxes and less in money there. But I'd really hope that we can put the health of our community ahead of the health of our wallets. And for the people that are in the hardest circumstances, they're one and the same. And so we need to be sensitive to that as well. But as far as me saying, I want zero levy, I want negative levy, I don't think that's where I want to start. I want to start from taking a step back and seeing where we're at, what our needs are, and where we see our needs going. And then in both the near future, come October, we're going to have those tax payments due, and how are we going to help our community then? Is it just by cutting our costs, or is it by delaying or forgiving, or just
Did you get that email?
postponing? It's just it's going to get rough. It's going to get complicated, and I want to be there for people. Over.
Thank you. Commissioner Storley?
I agree with most everything that's been said. I do feel that as a county board, we provide services. That's our number one. And to the community, yes. that all goes hand in hand with what people want and expect. I think we're in unprecedented times. We have situations where people may be losing businesses, and I think we have to rewrite the playbook. I think we have to look at all entities from what we provide as a board, as a county, and then how we can reach out into the community. It's easy to say when it sets the levy at 2 or 3 or 4. I agree with Commissioner Mills. I don't think we should start there. We should start with what are we providing, what can we provide, and what do we have to let go as far as providing. So it's uncharted waters, and I just think that it's like starting over, but yet we still have a certain groundwork of what is expected of us. Over.
Thank you. Commissioner Newkirk?
Yeah, thank you. We're going to touch on the agenda item. Yes, you have been very clear that it is not our first thought to reduce staff, and maybe that's all we have to do is when an item like that is on the agenda, that we have a byline next to it that says, this is not our first. I mean, you said it so very well, and it was probably 2 sentences, and it's lost for me now to repeat it as nicely as you said it, but to have it right there on the agenda, so when an employee pulls up the agenda and it says discussion on furlough, the next line says, we, as always, want to maintain our current staffing levels, and as a part of the discussion of the whole, we need to also have these discussions. Just some way to reassure the staff is all I'm looking at, and I think just on the agenda is the way to do it because that's where they're seeing it. Along with staffing, I don't think that it's responsible to say we're going to freeze, we're going to cut. We have spent years and years making promises to the staff and to the community that every time an employee resigns, retires, moves on, changes positions, that we evaluate whether or not the position that is now open is necessary and required, and if it needs to be changed. The Personnel Committee spends a lot of time reviewing, and Pam is currently going through and reviewing every department and every job description. And by doing that, we are making sure that the people that we have in place are providing the services that we need and require to provide. So I think it's a knee-jerk to just say we're not going to hire any more people. When we look at where the community is at and look at the resources that are needed for public health and human services, many of those jobs we are reimbursed for. It does not come from the taxpayer to have those positions. And so I think we need to take a look, as many of you have said, what services do we want to provide? What do we feel is needed as a community to provide? And what level can we offer that and not also in return hurt the community by providing those? So I am looking forward to being on the budget committee. I think this is a huge opportunity. I'm not worried about it. I think we will come together as we always do. And I know that we will figure this out and we will make it work and we will keep our community strong and moving forward. To the commissioners that have said we have too many employees, I do not want to have a discussion here live in front of anyone. That is cruel and unkind. But if you believe that we are providing services that really aren't wholly necessary, I 100% want to hear that conversation from you. If you feel that we have employees that do not provide service or are unnecessary, I want to hear that conversation. I don't necessarily want to hear specific names. I just want to hear of what services you do not think that we need to continue to provide. It's not about the people, it's about the service, it's about what we are giving to our community. So I'm not kidding. If you really believe that what we provide is more than what we can support as a community, I want to hear from you privately about what you think we can do without. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, for my comments, I'll be brief. I think we've sort of covered the gamut here. I always look at budget as always trying to balance revenues, services. And when you look at services, you know, are they needs or wants? And we have so many that are really required by needs, by statute. So when we get into these discussions, especially like, well, this is what we want to do, we have to review our statutory obligations. Can we do things just like our discussion in regards to the abatement? Well, we need to look for some advice, I think, especially from an auditor, as well as maybe AMC, on what should we do and what can we do. So we have some real challenges, and you know, budget cuts, I don't like to use that word. It's not a good conversation. I think I really agree with the comments that we got to sort of talk about what is our vision, what is our goals, what are our obligations. And sometimes in these difficult times, there's a greater need on the part, especially Health and Human Services. And so, yes, I think we got to look at that, balancing it. But I also do think that we're going to have to take a serious look at next year's budget and not do it like we did in the past. We're going to have to, I think, maybe it's in our values and statements that'll come out, is what is a good thing to have as a goal? In other words, are we going to have any levy increase at all? No levy increase? Or looking at a negative? We've got the Thai Botnick, we've got, you know, but we have a lot of good things going here too. We have a pretty good balanced budget that we've worked hard to get to. Now, some may think that's overspending, and so we have to look at that as well. So those are my comments. And in regards to the Budget Advisory Committee, maybe we can discuss this further, that might be just good to have this kind of discussion that we just had with the board, with the advisory committee, and hopefully with the budget, and keep this going every month as part of our meetings. And I guess we could talk more about that. But any other comments or follow up to anything I've said on that and going forward? Would you just state your name, please, and offer that? Okay.
Commissioner Mill?
Yeah. Commissioner Mill?
Thank you, Mr.
Can't hear you. I'm sorry.
How about now?
Nope.
Not very good.
How about now?
Nope.
Not. Something's right. Not right.
How about now?
Better.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Went straight to the source there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all of the commissioners' input there, and we say things differently, but I get the sense that we're saying similar things, and I find that very encouraging. And I think that we as leaders, being on that similar page, with some nuanced differences, I think that sends a great message in our community. And one of the metaphors that came to mind is I was just hoping that the county government can be a rock for our community to build off of, and not a rock that'll sink, but a rock to anchor to, and just bringing that stability and that leadership. I greatly appreciate all the commissioners' input there, and just going through this is going to be good. So thank you everyone for that. Over.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so I believe we can close the meeting unless there's any other comments. I guess I will entertain a motion, but let's just say, any other comments
I,
before we consider adjournment?
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering
Yeah.
if, in preparation for our meeting next week, if you would like Auditor Powers and myself to put forward a draft resolution about tax penalties that could be considered by the board next week. And then, of course, you can change it or edit it, but as something concrete that we would propose based on today's discussion.
I guess I would agree with that. That would be appreciated. I think trying to keep in mind information on some of the things we shared, but also what is recommended from the AMC. And any other comments on that from any other commissioners in regards to a resolution to be drafted to work through for our next meeting in regards to abatement? Okay, very good. Anything else? And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
So moved, Storley.
So moved. Second by
Okay.
Dukert.
Second by Dukert. Okay, all those in favor, roll call. Shaw, Commissioner DeShaw.
Aye.
Commissioner Dukert.
Aye, over.
Commissioner Mills.
This is Commissioner Mills. Aye, over.
Hershine's aye over, and I just want to thank all of you commissioners and staff that have helped us today. I think we're going in a good direction, and we're trying to work together. And we've got some real challenges, but we've got people, I think, that can step up and meet that challenge, and hopefully keep in mind that we're here to serve. We're here to serve the public, and we've got to always keep that in mind. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.